Welcome
Yeah.
to our first interview inside the Freedom Online Connect group. We want to get some content for some people, but tell us a little bit about you and your story, and how did you get to founding Pondering Christianity?
Yeah. First off, it's obviously a great pleasure to be here. So I'm super psyched about this. And Mike and I, we've been working on getting this up and running for a while now. So I'm excited to see what we can bring to you guys. So that being said, a little bit about pondering Christianity. So when I grew up as a pastor's son, a minister of, he's a Baptist minister. So you can relate, I'm sure, to more of a stricter form of Christianity. And growing up in a Christian church, I had a Christian lifestyle, but I wasn't necessarily a Christian, or I definitely wasn't a Christian. I went through the practices, but my faith was not in Christianity or God for that matter. So as I began growing up, I had a lot of questions, especially getting into my teenage years in regards to, how come the church is so distant from science? I felt like there was this huge discrepancy between the church's understanding of scientific findings and how they related to the Bible. And it seemed almost like there was this divide of either you had to choose religion or you had to choose science in explaining the world. And, that didn't sit well with me because I really, at the end of the day, I felt like if God is real, if God is out there, then science should be revealing him, not disagreeing with him. If he is the creator of all things, then, you would see that author's mark in all of his work. Um, and so I felt like that distance was there between the church and the evidence. And obviously it led me to really grow to dislike the church. And it was a largely, it started as an intellectual decision, and then became an emotional one. So it transitioned over a period of time from, I think that the church doesn't have this right, to, okay, now I think this is just all indoctrination and I don't believe any of it. And so became an atheist. And during my 6 year time in the military, there was a lot of experiences I had that shaped my view of the world and kind of opened my eyes up to a lot of different things. I mean, for example, I was under the understanding that, good people didn't exist unless they were Christians. And so obviously I was meeting a bunch of people who weren't Christians. And I'm like, oh, well, look, this proves that Christianity is wrong. There's good people outside of the faith.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so that started to kind of like erode away further at what I was taught. But over time, I just couldn't shake the idea that all of this was here by accident. I just could not get my head around that one thing.
Hmm.
And that began to prompt me to look into it, for a long period of time. And this is something we'll probably talk about further into the conversation about emotional decisions to pursue Christianity, or any faith for that matter. But for the longest time, I was intellectually lazy about the whole thing. I was sure that there were answers or explanations out there. I just chose not to go look for them, and that's what a lot of people do. So when I finally kind of got fed up with that, because I'm a very theoretical type person, um, so for me, understanding something completely as much as I possibly can is a huge piece for me, like actually getting into something. So I really enjoy theoretical stuff. So for me, I was like, okay, I'm not going to be lazy about this anymore. I'm going to see if there are in fact some explanations for these questions. And that's when I was introduced to Christian apologetics, like William Lane Craig, Frank Turk, Ravi Zacharias, Josh McDowell, Gary Habermas, Lee Strobel. I mean, the list goes on and on. Hugh Ross, Stephen Meyer, and just began to really see that there was 100% answers for biological, cosmological, human consciousness, morality, sociological answers. And it just took a little bit of looking. That's all it took. And a lot of people are just lazy. And
Yeah.
go ahead. What were you
Hey,
gonna say, man?
well, yeah. No, I want to ask a question because you said, hey, you grew up as a Christian, and
Yeah.
then saw some things, experienced some things, and it made you question. And then eventually
Yeah.
you like turn to say, nope, I'm not. I'm an atheist. I
Yeah.
don't even believe in God
Yeah.
now. What brought you back? Was there a crisis moment? Was there a maybe it was a series of things, but what was that? You and I love how you mentioned like there was always this idea of I couldn't shake just being here by accident, but was there a
Yeah.
moment that you pivoted for you in that?
Um, no, not. I know for some people there's an experience moment that's like that's the tipping point, but for me, it's like C.S. Lewis describes it as like waking up or falling asleep. You're not really sure when it happens; you just know it happened. So that's kind of the best way I can describe it for you is that it was kind of like I was asleep and then decided to wake up, and I didn't know the exact moment, but I just felt more and more suddenly aware of certain things, and suddenly like the explanations that I had for how the world was and the way that it worked began to unravel. And again, like I said, I'm a very theoretical person, and so the way that I view reality plays a large role in what I think is right, wrong, and how I should live my life. And so if I don't have a foundation on which to build, I don't really have a whole lot else I can do, because I'm suddenly in this free fall mode of what's right, what's wrong, what's the point of life, is it relationships, is it money, is it influence, is it power, is it politics, like you suddenly don't know which direction to go with your time and your energy and your skills. And that's kind of where I was at, is in the military I was like, well, if God doesn't exist and we're all just here by accident, now what? Like it leaves
Yeah.
you with this question of like, what is important if that is in fact the way the world works. um, and so that's really what thrust me into looking further into it. And once I got a hold of it, I just couldn't stop drinking it. I couldn't stop consuming it because of it was answering so many questions. And there was always a part of me, like even at my worst moments in atheism, which is ironic, I was more of a theist. I wasn't as much of an atheist, but I was more of a theist in the sense of I believed in what was called an architect, which is essentially you don't put a name on it. It's very deism. You don't put a name to God. He doesn't have any personal touch or anything. It's just basically like there's a creator and that's it.
So there was something, but you weren't ready to attach the label God to it.
Right, right.
But if someone were to ask you, uh, what in a sense do you believe in God or whatever, you would kind of just held up the atheism hand and say,
Yeah.
no, I don't.
Yeah, I think I floated between deism and atheism for a period of time. So there would have been times where you'd be like, "Do you believe in God?" And I would have been like, "No." And then there would have been times where you'd be like, "Do you believe in God?" And I'd be like, "It depends on your definition."
Yeah, yeah.
So it would have floated between the two.
Okay. Um, I wanna ask. This is, I think, for what we're dealing with now with coronavirus, and we're
Yeah,
all the whole world has just changed.
yeah,
And I think whether you're a person of faith or if you're watching this and you're not, maybe you resonate more with what Charlie was saying and where he was at as an atheist, or maybe it's just kind of this thin slice of deism, but not ready to quite call it God. Like, um, maybe put yourself in their shoes, Charlie, and what are what are some of the questions that they're asking right now, or how are they potentially, I mean, how are they potentially dealing with this, or if there is no creator, then how do we handle coronavirus? I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
yeah. No, that's actually a very excellent question. It seems like a simple one, but it's actually extremely deep and very, very important, because in times like this, where you see a mass amount of bad, if you want to just keep it simple, if you see a lot of bad happening, for instance, coronavirus, I mean, it's causing the majority of the concern is lying within the fact of its potent ability to infect so many people. And then in that sense, 5% of them are dying, 5 to 3%, depends on what numbers you look at. But you say, okay, that's a lot of people dying. And so I think it immediately prompts the question of if God is a loving God, if God is a all loving, all goodness God, why is something like this happening? And so what I think is going to continue to happen is you're going to continue to have atheists almost, you're going to see atheism continue to rise. I think from this experience, because of the fact that this only further reinforces what a lot of atheists like to use is a moral argument against God, of basically saying, okay, if God is an all-loving God, let's assume he is, then there wouldn't be evil in the world, which that's a weak premise, but nonetheless, they're going to use that. And then they're going to say, so therefore, because coronavirus is killing people and so many people are dying of a death and poorly timed death, then God isn't real. So I think that the largest pressing question you find is that people are going to really hold on to the fact that evil is happening, and therefore God can't be a loving God, or at least not the God of the Bible.
Okay. So, so what then? Because I think for myself and even a lot of other people, we may say, well, I disagree, but we don't necessarily want to get
Yeah.
in a debate. And this is where I love
Right.
Pondering Christianity. You're very relational. So you're not afraid
Yeah.
of that question. You actually say, if you get into your channel and watch it and you lean into this stuff. And
Oh yeah.
so, um, and it's not like, oh, well, I gotta, here's the Bible, and you're not into. I mean, you're a Christian, but you're not
Read
like,
this
oh, just
verse.
yeah, and this is gonna change your life. You're into
Yeah.
like, okay, that's the starting point. Now let's have a conversation. Let's ask,
Yeah. Yeah.
ask some
Absolutely.
questions. So, help us. Just how do we approach that, even with our own dialogue, our inner dialogue, because we're having that as
Yeah.
well, and then
100%.
to be able to slowly take a next step in that conversation, because for a lot of us that would just shut the conversation down, we're done and it's over.
Yeah. Um, so I think it's really, really important, to be as curious as you possibly can about someone's position. So if someone says something along the lines of coronavirus is killing a lot of people and this is really bad and therefore a loving God doesn't exist, you can't just let them say that and leave that hanging. What you have to do is be genuinely curious, not invasively curious, like, what do you mean by that? You want to come at it from the sense of like, hey, what do you mean by that? Like, I'm really curious about what you just said. How does that how did you come to that conclusion? What evidence do you have for that? And so when you ask these open-ended questions, it allows you to genuinely explore this person's worldview and find that they're really stealing from God, like a morality of what's right and what's wrong. I mean, at the end of the day, if you want to sum this up in a quick conclusion, it's like, look, if we're all here by accident and disease and evolution are really the way that we're improving, you could say that this is really good for the human race. But of course, no one would say that. And
Yeah.
so, in that sense, they are borrowing a moral right and wrong from Christianity, so that life is preferred to death and that disease isn't okay and that we don't want people to die from disease, and it's not okay to cure the human population of the weak ones, right? Like, life has value everywhere it's at. So there's a lot of underlying premises that they're not talking about when they make those kind of statements. But all you have to do is ask them to open up the hood of the statement they just made, and then you'll suddenly start finding all of these assumed premises for their arguments of like, well, there is a moral standard of right and wrong and good, and life is preferred to death, and they're borrowing a lot of that stuff from Christianity. And so you can then begin to have the conversation with them of where they're kind of getting it from, and just explore it, like let them build it for you.
Okay.
The best thing you can do is go ahead.
Well, yeah, that's what I was hearing you say. Like, what I hear you saying is just don't defend, ask.
No.
Just,
Yeah.
and asking, the asking is not of, oh, I got a superior position than you. You
Yeah.
are actually trying to understand, which means I'm trying to build a relationship with you. There's obviously,
Right.
I have my beliefs, you have your beliefs. I want to better understand where you're coming from. And when you
Yeah.
create some understanding, you actually create some relationship. So when the time comes to speak or whatever, you actually have some foundation to stand on. So the idea of
Oh yeah.
people don't care what you have to say until they know that you care. Like, your question's just more of care and understanding.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and that's the key piece, is to come from a place of, Christianity calls us to be loving and humble individuals. And so for you to go to someone and be like, you're wrong, is like, especially if you do it in that kind of immediate abruptness, you're gonna push someone the wrong way, and that's not going to come across very humble, and that's going to immediately torpedo your chance to give them anything. You see, the first rule in sales, right? And that's, everybody's selling everything all the time. So you're trying to sell them the idea so that they like it, is you got to get someone to like you, right? It doesn't matter if what I say is true. If you don't like me, you're not going to listen to what I have to say. So that's the first rule, is you want to build a relationship with that person. And as a Christian, like, it's important to remember, right? God calls us to love everyone, even our enemies, most especially. And that's what differs Christianity so much from everything else, is that it's calling us to be loving on everyone, because everyone's an image of God. And so I know that's super hard. I'm not saying it's super easy, but what I am saying is that when you look at it from that angle, you should be coming to this person with a loving consideration of, hey, this person might not know, or maybe they've never really thought about these statements they make. And so it's important to challenge people, but do it from a position of genuine curiosity of, hey, have you ever explored that thought you just threw out there a little bit further?
Okay, and you want to kind of explore that with them, like take that journey with them, because
Yeah,
as you said, in
100%.
your journey, you were spiritually lazy. You didn't explore it
Yeah.
out, and when you explored it out,
Yeah.
oh well, then now you start to question and think. Um, what could be a goal? You know, because most likely these conversations are going to happen, if they happen, which is going to be rare. We can talk about that in another episode, for how to look for these hooks and steer it or ask a question, or maybe you can even
Hmm.
allude to a little bit of that here. But I'm really kind of looking for,
Sure.
what am I trying to leave this conversation? Because sometimes you're like, I don't want to push too far.
Yeah.
At the same time, I don't want to just, oh yeah, and go on my way.
Yeah.
Is there anything that I'm kind of want to leave them with?
Yeah, you were hitting hard there, Mike. So yeah, you definitely want to, as Greg Coco puts it, leave a stone in their shoe. You're not going to immediately convert anyone. Like, just get that out of your head right now. What you're doing is you're gardening, or you're what you're trying to do is, when you have a conversation with someone, you're not looking to unravel their entire worldview. That's not good for you. That's not good for them. What you want to do is you want to try to tackle one topic and then explore that topic fully. And trust me, if you explore the topic fully, it's going to have some weak points that are exposed. Like, it's going to, and people are going to realize how much they don't know about something. Like, legitimately, they don't know about something. Um, so you just have to be really curious and ask these questions of, how did you come to that conclusion? What do
How
you
did
mean
you?
by that? And where? How did you come to that conclusion? What do you mean by that? And what evidence do you have for that? So those are the three tactics explained by Greg Kokel in his book Tactics, to really help you explore someone's idea process. And it's going to expose the entire underlying structure for me making a statement like, well, if God existed, then coronavirus wouldn't be happening. Well, there's a lot of assumptions I'm making when I say that. So it's important for us as a Christian, for first and foremost, you need to be very understanding for someone, because that is a complexing topic. Like, you genuinely need to think about it as a Christian, like, why is that happening? If God is a loving God, why is that happening? Because you're going to be better at having a relationship with God and Christ through that understanding. So this person is going to ultimately help you in your relationship, but you
Oh, I
have to have
love
the
that. I
patience
love
to
that.
hear them out. So you really have to go at it with an open mind, because the way I see it, again, I am a big believer in God exists. He is truth. Truth should reveal God. And so I'm always on the exploratory path of, where's the truth at? And so when someone claims they got it, I'm like, all right, let's see it. Like, let me see what you got. Like, let's see if it's going to stand up to some questions. And like, I'm doing it because I'm genuinely curious. And so that's a gift I've been given by God, to just, I have a very, very curious mind when it comes to these questions. And so it's easy for me. And I know some people, you have to fight the urge to get offended. You really, really do. Because the
Oh yeah.
moment you get offended, you're going from an intellectual conversation to an emotional conversation. And when you make that transition, you're playing by different rules suddenly. So you really want to keep it in the intellectual grounds as long as you possibly can, because that's where you're going to actually make progress.
Yeah. Well, and most of us have a very um, deep personal connection tie
Yeah.
to our faith, whether we
Mhm.
are Christians and we're like, I'm emotionally attached to this, or hey, I'm an atheist. There's probably some emotional attachment that caused you to go in that direction, which is why it sparks so much energy and
Yeah.
passion in these things, which you are um, not afraid to jump into. But I've seen your videos, and I've seen comments that come along the way, and they're not all
Mm.
positive. They're not all favorable. You know,
Nope.
it is, just the
No.
fact, you mentioned something, and nothing is a controversial statement, but when you mention God or truth, woo,
Yeah.
passions go high, and
Yeah.
so
Oh yeah.
you're you're big on trying to maintain those emotions, which I love. Um,
Yeah. Well, you gotta manage that. You really do. Because the moment someone gets angry, I'm telling you now, you've lost. Like you have to, the moment you make someone mad, you have to back off because they're gonna get mad. Like they're gonna get mad eventually. And you just have to feel that moment of you're pressing a little bit too far because you gotta remember you're talking about the underlying structure, right? You have structures of reality, right? Of like God exists, therefore life is valuable, therefore I can't kill people to get good stuff. And so like you start building it up, right? But for an atheist, they have a completely different structure from you as a Christian. So the moment you start undoing that entire thing, you're causing this person to free fall in the reality that they've come to understand. It's kind of like waking somebody up from the matrix. So that's a shocker of an experience. If you haven't seen the Matrix, you should go watch that. That's basically what you're doing to someone. So you have to bear that in mind that you can't just pull out that key Jenga block and watch this whole person's worldview come crashing down and then walk away and be like, see, I told you it was weak. You have to be there ready to
yeah,
catch that and be like, look, I've got a solution for you that can hold up to these questions, that can hold up to these the evidence, and kind of go from there with it. But
yeah,
again, you don't put yourself in a position where you're making all these positive statements like God exists and he loves you, because now you're putting yourself in a position of the atheist is gonna be like, prove that. And so a lot of people are not prepared for that question. And that's fine. That's fine. Like you want to explore their view because it's going to help you be a better Christian to understand where that atheist is coming from. And the reality too is that everybody's different. Like I've never met two atheists that have the same set of beliefs. I've never met two Buddhists that really have the same set of beliefs, honestly. So
mhm,
you just have to be exploratory, like you have to be exploring them because you need to get the lay of the land before you start making statements. And
yeah,
generally people really, really like talking. It's like you were asking me, Mike, like, how do I get into these conversations? Well, turns out people really like talking about this stuff. Like really, really like talking about this stuff. And you'd be surprised. Like you just start with some common conversation. And you'd be like, "Hey, where do you guys go to church? Or are you guys religious at all?" Or you just start with a very open, vague question of, I'm thinking about it, and I think the church has definitely a lot of things it needs to improve on, and when it comes to intellectual arguments, and people love that. People
yeah,
absolutely love that.
yeah.
So, and I go ahead, Mike.
Well, I'm finding the same thing. I mean, we're pastoring a church plant, and the what I'm learning in some of the recent research and just in my conversations and people at Freedom who are reaching out, same thing. A lot of people are open to God. They're open to
Yeah.
conversations. Now, are they going to be
Right.
jumping in and being pastors or mission? No, it's a
No.
slow process, but they're open.
Very slow
But
process. Yeah.
for a lot of us, we think of the most angry atheist person in our mind in whatever arguments they have, and we think, oh, that's the majority of people. They want nothing to do, and we shrink back. When
No.
actually, that's
Those
a
are.
very small percentage of people, um, and
Yeah.
we still love them, and we still want to build a
Yeah.
relationship with them and dialogue with them. But at the same time, the majority of people are open. In fact, the stats that I'm looking at say about a third of the people would be open to going to church. Maybe not now
Mm.
because going to church we can't do that, but they would be open
Yeah.
to
Not
attending the
currently.
church. Back in the like last week, they would have gone if they just had a personal invite.
Yeah.
They would be open. In fact, even going regularly. And if you think a third of the population, and this is the United States, that's a
Mm.
lot of people who are waiting on an invitation. So I
Yeah.
like the idea of building relationships. I see a comment in here from Martha saying the question is so making it more about religion or making it more about relationships, not religion, right? Um, and so that's my question for you. But just to kind of wrap that up, that's what I'm hearing is a big, big first step.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the key piece to remember is you have to remember this. Okay. Like when you ask that third or half, or even I would say probably 2/3 of atheists, like why did you stop going to church? Why don't you like Christianity? The first thing they're going to cite to you is a terrible experience they had with a Christian or with a church. And so that's generally what's causing them to accept atheism, just like it was for me. It wasn't an intellectual decision of like they saw a study that says God can't exist. It was like they had an emotional experience with a Christian who wasn't necessarily showing them the love of Christ, right? And they're like, well, if this is what Christianity looks like, I want nothing to do with it. And therefore, I'm an atheist. And then they go to seek out intellectual books on atheism and, Richard Dawkins and the God delusion. And of course, all these famous atheists, they're going to go and look that stuff up, and then suddenly, like, people are going to pick a position they want to have, and then once they have that position, they're going to go research information to get to that. It's called presuppositions. So like, you have to be guarding against presuppositions with yourself of like, am I trying to make evidence stack up to support my worldview, or am I interpreting the evidence to be to deter? Am I interpreting the evidence as holistically as I possibly can, or am I being very favorable in the way that I interpret it? And so they think a lot of Christians are doing that. So you have to guard against that yourself as a Christian, to be, again, truth is on your side as a Christian, right? God exists, therefore these things reflect him. So you got to keep that in mind. And that's why, like, that's your secret to not getting angry, is they're getting angry because they're struggling, right? Like, when I don't know intellectually what to say, I'm going to get pissed. I'm going to get emotionally mad, because that's the best way to shut down the conversation, is I just have to get super angry. Nobody wants to play the game with me anymore. Mm-hmm. And when it gets to that point, you just got to back off. But know that truth is on your side, and you just sit there calm and collected of like, that's interesting. How did you come to that conclusion? Because you know that the truth is eventually going to come out, and they're going to give you a foothold to talk to them about God and Christianity and the existence of, et cetera, et cetera. You work your way through it in tiers based off of where that person's at. And that's one more thing I wanted to say, is that there's no one single formula for anyone. Everyone is uniquely different. And honestly, I really like that, because that allows every conversation to be unique in its own right. So you got to enjoy that. And again, that's why you want to get the lay of the land, because everybody is a little bit different.
Yeah, for sure. Well, listen, Charlie, we're about at the 30-minute mark. I want to honor your time and our time. I want to say thank you so much for joining in. But before you guys go, Charlie, you got a channel. Tell us about this channel. What's happening, and how do I put the link in there. Talk, please. Let us know what about it.
Yeah. So in Pondering Christianity, my goal is to try to take these complex topics and break them down into 5-minute whiteboard videos, for the sake of keeping it simple for you and for I. But the first thing I had an issue with when doing apologetics or learning apologetics was the complexity of the arguments and the points. And it's really difficult to talk about, all the complexities of morality or cosmology or biology with someone. And so it's just easier to try to simplify them down into easier arguments. And so that's what my goal is with the channel, is to kind of bring these topics down to a chewable, bite-sized level, so that people can consume that and get the conversation up and rolling. And really all you're trying to do is plant the stone in someone's foot. And if you don't know, if they're like, hey, I want complex, full theoretical answers to biology, for example, like evolution, then you can turn them to a resource of, hey, this guy's an expert. Stephen Meyer, this guy's a great expert. You should go read Darwin's Doubt or something like that. You don't have to be the expert in the category. You just got to know enough to get a foothold to get this person curious. And then once you do that, then you have resources to send them to, for them to go all the way in. Like myself, I just needed someone to open the door, and then God will walk through with an expert in the field and give them a book, and they'd be like, look, if you really want to know everything that's going on, just read this book.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Charlie. Well, thank you guys. Thank you guys for joining us online. I'll follow up on the comments later. Continue to ask questions on here. We are going to post the website, and Charlie, we're going to do this again. And dive deeper into other topics. For now, go to his YouTube link. I put it on there. Subscribe to his channel. The whiteboards are awesome. They're 5-minute downloadable chunks. They're a lot of fun. You're going to like them a lot. Charlie Mitchell, founder of Pondering Christianity, joining us on Freedom. Thank you so much, man. And we look forward to seeing you guys soon.
Yeah, man. Thanks for the opportunity. And, you guys keep pondering.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. See ya.
I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the message today. I hope you felt inspired
to take your next step of faith with Jesus. Just a couple next steps that you can take coming out of this. One, leave a review or a comment or share this message. That really does spread the message further and faster when you do that. Secondly, if there's a next step that you need to take coming out of this, head on over to our website, click Get Involved, and let us know exactly how you can take your next step. We would love to partner with you in that. And finally, if you have been impacted in a positive way through our ministries, or your family has been impacted in a positive way through our ministries, go on over to our website and click Give. And if you want to partner with us financially, that would be huge in getting the message of Jesus out through our ministries. Thank you again for stopping by the podcast. Have a wonderful week. God bless.